Hi everyone, thank you for joining and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will be diving into the top 4 common compliance challenges for financial institutions. My name is Nicole Vesser and I'll be your moderator for today's session. And before we get started, I have a few housekeeping announcements to cover. First, today's webinar will be recorded and available on our website after this live session, and will also be emailed directly to us if you're joining us today in real time. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's session. So if you have any questions for us, you can go ahead and type them into the Q&A section in the Teams event. I'll be monitoring that and then we'll answer questions at the end of the session. And if for any reason we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterward. Now, before we jump in, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's session. As I mentioned, my name is Nicole Vesser. I'm a Senior Solutions Manager here at Able Solutions, and I'm excited to be your host for the session today. And joining me are 2 esteemed members of our team. First up, Mike Burns is the Head of Sales Enablement for Zix AppRiver. He has more than 20 years experience in technology, product management, marketing, and business development. And prior to heading up revenue enablement at Zix AppRiver, Mike was with Entrust as market lead for the company's identity and access management and fraud detection solution areas with a focus on the financial and government sector. So we're really lucky to have him with us for today's topic. And Scott Burba is the Vice President of Able Solutions. Scott joined Able Solutions in 2018 and has over 27 years in business and technology consulting across numerous industries. So he's a great add today as well. We've got lots of great information to share with you today, so without any further ado, Scott, I will hand the mic over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Just going to spend a little time here just briefly introducing Able Solutions. For over 26 years, Able Solutions is focused on partnering with our customers to develop solutions that deliver business excellence in terms of profitability, productivity, and competitive leadership. We're a Microsoft Gold partner and have been since 2001. We provide our customers expertise in all things Microsoft, including Microsoft 365, Power Platform, Dynamics 365, and Azure services, such as machine learning and cognitive services. We are an AppRiver Platinum partner. What that means is we provide our customers with the advanced security features and products from AppRiver to help those customers manage risk and achieve compliance requirements as it relates to security. This partnership also allows us to directly provide our customers with Microsoft licensing. Our consultants between the 2 organizations bring decades of experience through this partnership approach that delivers the right solution for the right price that meets your specific business needs. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike and he can begin the conference.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both Nicole and Scott. I have a thunderstorm rolling through, so if you hear a bit of thunder in the background, apologies for that in advance. Early this morning, I was mentioning to my wife that today we weren't going to be using video, just some internet sensitivities on my side, and she's like, oh no, that's going to be so hard for everybody to follow. But rest assured, the next 25 minutes are going to go fast, so you may want to take some notes. Personally, over the past 10 years, I've attended many financial conferences, met with customers and analysts, and personally I've always been fascinated by the dynamic nature of the industry. And while my focus has always been on security and compliance, it's always been coupled with bank transformation and in essence the impact that it has on employees and customers and so on and so forth. I don't see those 2 as being decoupled, right? That there's so many cross dependencies. And so, as we look at just at a, quick high level snapshot, you all are familiar that it's a most challenging industry, right? And I mean, as technology evolves, there's great opportunities. And I chose one very simple example around mobile and mobile banking. And, I was an early adopter of mobile banking, and very quickly there was additional applications that got layered on top of that. Person-to-person payments, remote deposit capture of paper-based checks, And then introducing new technologies like mobile identity proofing so that customers didn't have to say go into a branch to open a new account and do that identity proofing check, and even using the mobile device for better authentication and fraud detection techniques and capabilities. So really interesting stuff, but with technology also comes new challenges, right? New cyber threats, new compliance laws, new competitors, and of course, the occasional global crisis. And back in February, every one of us, we're in the same boat as the pandemic hit. Businesses closed their physical doors. We at Zixanap River, I would say 95, if not 99% of our employees virtually immediately started working from home. Remote work skyrockets, right? We started meeting with our doctors on Zoom and telehealth calls. People are changing the way they buy groceries. I didn't personally, but I was stunned. I was in the store with my wife in April, and there were all these employees with like, I don't know, red shirts on, and they were shopping for customers, right? Doing the personal shopping, and then I guess they would be delivered to the customer's home. So big changes everywhere, distance learning and digital processes using virtual tools. And of course, physical interactions kind of stepped aside for what I call the digital revolution to take over. And forgive me for using a cartoon. I came across this a few months ago. It was really just this boardroom discussion about digital transformation being so many years away and have lots of time to change, and then the COVID ball ready to hit the building. And it really struck truth to me. I've been, as I mentioned earlier, personally interested in digital transformation for many years, and just intrigued on how it's changing our lives. And not only mobile, but things like artificial intelligence and sensors and Internet of Things and social networks have all fueled adoption of the digital revolution. But despite all this innovation, it's still in its infancy, or maybe its preteen years. And this chart that I'm showing on the right-hand side, the technology adoption cycle, was introduced back in the kind of the early 90s by a guy named Jeffrey Moore. He wrote the book called Crossing the Chasm, how technologies went through these various stages. And as I mentioned, I think we're beyond the early adopters, maybe just at the start of the early majority. But COVID has become that tipping point, the proverbial kick in the pants, pardon the expression. And it's not a blip, right? It's dramatically transforming how things are going. If I go back to the grocery example, since March, since COVID hit, there has been a 100% increase in online grocery shopping, a full doubling of that. Digital entertainment has grown by over 50%. Disney, as one example, right, one of the market leaders in the entertainment field, pivoted their entire organization towards digital streaming. Doesn't mean they didn't do it before. It doesn't mean that that's all they'll be doing, but they're really refocusing the company around a digital first strategy. And we see that in other industries and organizations, and the financial industry is no exception. These statistics are all growth statistics since March of 2020, of this year. Some of the surveys say, hey, 2/3 of customers, 62%, will use less cash and really shift towards contactless payments. Almost 50% increase in digital loans through small to medium enterprises. And of course, a concern, right? 82% of those surveyed were concerned about going into a branch, and the adoption of things like mobile banking just went through the roof. And this is good news, right? Banks and financial institutions have been looking to technology to engage customers, to reduce cost, to streamline the business, to compete better, right? But the reality is that as any organization increases their digital footprint, there's an increase in compliance risk. And this is from a recent survey an organization we work with called Post QA surveyed 100 CIOs, and you can see that 89% of them share this concern. And so what we'll do over the next 20 minutes is take a look at four current trends that are going on within the financial sector and the impact that they all have on compliance in one form or another. So we'll talk about workplace transformation, really around new ways of digitally engaging with customers, with partners. We'll be looking at increased threats and how they're impacting the business day to day, the day-to-day business operations. We'll look at expanding regulations, not just around data security, but one of the areas that is really growing in scope is data retention regulations. And then the last area is around corporate governance. Our exploding digital world is intersecting with this shift in like social movements and culture, and that has a big impact on organizations and how they implement guiding controls within the organization. So the next four sections will have a very similar format, and we'll start with workplace transformation. As we kind of alluded to in some of the stats, remote work is here to stay, right? Sure, it will decrease when the pandemic is behind us. There are certainly some good examples of people going back to work, maybe part-time, but many organizations, 2/3 of the organizations out there and over 80% of the managers expect some level of remote work in the future, right after or post-pandemic. That was through research that Microsoft conducted. Even here at Zix and AppRiver, we not only immediately shifted to work at home, but now we are looking at implementing permanent work from home policies and guidelines, because as an organization, we've been able to equip our employees and adapt, and there are a lot of benefits, right? Increased productivity. It's probably trickier if you have children at home, point well made there, but there is an opportunity for increased productivity, increased work satisfaction, right? That work-life balance, being a little bit more flexible in hours and less commuting, and certainly an impact on decreasing real estate costs over the long time. So there's a lot of good trends, but when we look at remote work, it's not just our employees, right? So we've seen this dramatic increase in email traffic, but much of that traffic is with external parties, outside domains like partners and customers. So, the question then becomes, how large, or, how are large files being shared? Are we using public websites like Dropbox? How is sensitive data being secured? Are we still using fax? Are we hoping people will remember to encrypt or somehow protect information? And what's the consumer experience? So there's a lot of questions as we shift our communications to more and more digital. And the other thing is, when we think about, well, there will be this decrease in physical or inch branch visits, what's going to replace wet signatures? So, I think this whole work from home and workplace transformation has many considerations, and it's not just our employees, right? It's our customers that are working from home, and it's our partners that are working from home. And so, how do we deal with all these business processes? So from a solutions perspective, I have two short customer stories. I'm not going to be doing an in-depth case study, but the first is a California investment firm, a recent customer of ours, that have adopted our email encryption really for its ease of use. And so in their case, they have a lot of high net worth clients. They've been in business since 1931, and millions of investors across the country. So the challenge is that, as there's more and more digital communications, these high net worth clients are getting fed up with dealing with fax. It's slow, it's cumbersome. Sometimes there's applications that are introduced for, some basic email encryption, but they require, creating new accounts and new passwords and just a lot of friction. And so they chose Zix. We've been the gold standard of email encryption for, and when I say Zix, I obviously mean Zigzag River, pardon the company name, but we've been designing and selling email encryption for over 20 years. And so what we've been able to do is to provide an automated solution so that the employees at the investment firm don't have to remember to encrypt, right? All outbound emails go through our servers, we scan them for any sensitive data, and if there is sensitive data, we automatically encrypt those outbound messages. And from the recipient side, right from the customer side, we've been able to eliminate the need for registering for new accounts and providing things like single sign-on so that the customer experience is just as straightforward, and they can even reply in an encrypted manner. The second story is a little bit different. This is a state bank examiner, so they oversee 158 chartered banks, and they've been using digital technologies to secure mortgage documents as they deal with all the banks under their oversight. And some of the challenges is that their file sharing solutions were cumbersome. They weren't integrated to their Outlook email environment, and they had limitations. So they chose Zix for a better user experience, first of all, so that they could send large files up to 100 gigabytes in size, right, or multiple files in that single message. And also include something called rights management. So if those files were not to be seen by other parties, a flag could be set, and that particular message with those large files could not be forwarded to other parties, or maybe it couldn't be printed, or maybe it would automatically expire after 14 days if that was the permissions that were included on the rights management. But the bank examiner, the state bank, also wanted to look towards unifying their tools, right? And so they used that same capability, that same secure file sharing solution, to now introduce digital signatures onto those mortgage documents. So, a more modern solution that's easier to use and enabling more use cases so that digital can start to replace physical processes without compromising security or compliance. So the second section we'll dive into is increased cyber risks. And we all know, I don't have to quote statistics, but attacks are getting more frequent and more sophisticated. But the reality is that 9 out of 10 of them begin with an email attack. And so email is really that single largest point of entry. And once the pandemic hit, we saw a 350% increase in phishing attacks, right? You can just imagine the mayhem, the chaos, the relevant topics du jour. The fraudsters just jumped on that to execute their schemes. And unfortunately, banks and financial institutions are, 300 times more likely of being hit. That's not a new statistics, but what's very important to note is that it's not just customers, right? We always hear about this customer being hacked or that customer being hacked or this small business, but it's also about banking employees. And so I have 3 brief examples here, pretty recent ones. So just this month, or sorry, not this month, in September, last month, one of the largest banks in Chile, Banco de Estado, was hit by a ransomware attack. So an employee opened an email and there was a malicious office document that appeared legit, and it installed ransomware throughout the organization. No one in the organization could access their computer data. It forced the bank to shut down for 3 days to recover. So a lot of cost, a lot of brand reputation impact. The second example there is back in February. There was this very interesting business email compromise attack, where the cyber criminals posed as the wife of the CEO of the bank, of the financial institution. They spoofed her email address. But it was so well thought out that they actually interacted with the bank 13 times through email, again, impersonating the CEO's wife. And in the end, after they were convinced that they were dealing with a legitimate party, over $2 million were siphoned from that particular bank. So, you know, the attacks to the criminal vectors don't stop. The third one is very similar. It's, you know, it's where they install malware on a bank employee's PC. It then filtered to a second computer that had access to the ATM network. And criminals could then remove the controls at ATM machines, like having to enter a 4-digit PIN or, you know, the daily withdrawal limits. And so they were able to very easily siphon cash right out of those ATM machines through an attack that originated in email. So, you know, educating users is important, but it only goes so far. And the reality is that criminals are extremely well organized. The amount of software that they use, the sophistication of their tools, their supply chain where they buy and sell software, and customer support, and information that allows them to execute on their cyber attacks is just it's mind-boggling. And so you definitely need an email threat protection solution that will catch what we call zero-day attacks, right? It will not only block out spam and impersonation attacks, but all those zero-day attacks. And it needs to be backed by a threat team that is working Christmas morning at 6 a.m. to watch the recent threats and make sure your system at the bank is updated while you're off enjoying your family life, as you should, right? So having a real-time threat team that is blocking those attacks along with the system itself. But it's not just about catching the threats, right? So you need to think beyond the filtering and the detection. And so the next example, customer example I want to discuss is this firm in North Carolina. This one actually is not a financial institution, but it's a relevant example. They had a very good threat protection solution. They were pretty happy with keeping malware out. They didn't have an attack or a breach, but they had a lot of user frustration. Inbound emails were being delayed by 2 to 3 hours. Emails that they were sending to their customers were being blocked and they didn't even know about it. There was all kinds of false positives. And so, you know, when you look at threat protection and cybersecurity solutions, you have to consider the impact on the business, right? It's not just about keeping the criminals out, but can business continue at a pace where your employees aren't losing productivity, aren't getting frustrated, and same with your customers, if not more so. The second example is a financial wholesaler in Montana, and even in their case, they were an existing encryption customer. They were using a threat protection tool from another vendor, but we had reached out through a marketing campaign with our partners, and we're discussing something called our Outlook 365 security audit tool. And this particular tool really intrigued them, right? Because what it does is it allows us to go into your email and Exchange or Outlook environment and discover configuration issues that can cause vulnerability, that can introduce risk, right? So it's a proactive way to assess your system and stop issues before they happen. Looking at things like, you know, mailbox permissions and inbox rules and forwarding settings, you know, and whether multi-factor authentication is used. All these things are important because criminals can use these types of configurations to either initiate or accelerate a threat on the organization. I wish we had a real-time session. It makes it so much easier when we have time for a little bit of interactions and questions, but we'll pick that up at the end. So make note of your questions or send them in to Nicole and we'll catch them at the end. The third area that we want to cover is expanding regulations themselves, right? Regulatory compliance, they're definitely growing everywhere across the globe. Gartner predicts that in the next 3 years, 2/3 of the world, 65% of the world will be covered by data privacy laws. So I'm not sure if you've heard of GDPR across the European Union. It's affecting financial institutions, all organizations, right? And here in the United States, California has kind of led the way with a GDPR-like privacy law called the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA. And now there's 13 other states that are starting to adopt and enact these privacy laws. And many organizations find it very, very difficult to keep up. And you all know that, probably banking is one of the most regulated industries, right? With oversight organizations and compliance like FFIEC and GLBA and FINRA. We'll talk a little bit about FINRA. And even things like PSD2. PSD2 is coming out of Europe. It's Payment Services Directive 2, but it's really all around regulations about open banking and opening up the markets for more competition and more information sharing between banks. And with that brings more compliance challenges. So the reality is that these regulations are being driven by the growth in digital business, right, and digital interactions. I think traditionally, certainly from my experience, many of the regulations have been around things like data security and protecting personal financial information and PII, but data retention is becoming a major consideration for financial institutions, particularly as they adopt these modern communication methods, right? So a survey late last year concluded that over 80% of advisors, financial advisors, were using social media for business use. That could be, as you see here, Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft Teams. And during the lockdown, almost 6 out of 10 customers, so investment customers, saying that their communications with financial advisors have changed and really gone to a modern digital type of use. And they plan to stay that way because it's convenient, right? But it does introduce these new compliance complexities. So let's talk a little bit more about this, the whole concept of FINRA and the need to retain communications in a broker-dealer scenario. So in this particular situation, we had an opportunity with an organization. They were not a customer. They were actually using another competitor, I guess you'd say, another vendor for archiving their email communications. And as they started to increase new digital channels like Microsoft Teams, they realized from their bank examiner, their regulator, that they were out of compliance, right? And I have a quote there in the second bullet directly from FINRA guidance saying that the use of an increasing use of broad array of digital channels like instant messaging and social media may pose challenges for firms in their ability to comply with these obligations, these data retention obligations. And so, this particular broker-dealer looked to their current vendor for archiving Microsoft Teams. And that vendor could do it, but it was a third-party solution, so it wasn't nicely integrated, and the cost was prohibitive. I mean, every organization has tight budgets. Nobody has unlimited budgets, right? So they turned to Zix for their unified archiving solution with very modern supervisory controls. They were able to provide a single unified view of archiving their email communications, their Microsoft Team communications, and prove regulatory compliance and run their ongoing supervisory functions and audits across all those particular channels. So we're coming into the fourth area, that I wanted to cover, and that is one of corporate governance. And you know, throughout the world, right, through the country, the nation, the world, we've been going through this big shift in society, right, in our company culture. You know, equality, diversity, inclusion, discrimination, harassment. They're all shaping how we govern and run our businesses. And unfortunately, you know, as technology expands, so, you know, I have a stat there on the increased use of Microsoft Teams. So as more and more employees and more communications between employees and customers are using new types of media, it's hard to monitor all this, right? It makes it challenging. You know, the growth of data will double every 2 years. And so when you think about compliance officers and HR leaders and lawyers within organizations, how do they sift through all this data? And more of that e-discovery, that requirement to produce data, if issues arise, will be shifted in-house. And so, you know, these business users in legal and HR will need modern tools that allow them to really govern and run their business well. So I'm going to break this last one up into the two distinct use cases. The first one is around this HR oversight. And as I mentioned, right, there are many factors these days that affect employee sentiment. Gardner did a survey. You can see some of the stats below on the impact of integrity and good governance on company culture, right? So when an organization takes this seriously, when they implement monitoring controls, when they educate, when they reinforce, when they enforce the culture, you have a lot less misconduct, right? You actually improve employee engagement because there's this freedom that comes from employees to you know, when they feel safe, they can take more risks, they can share more ideas, they can put themselves out there, and productivity grew out of all that. And so, you know, as we think about, well, sometimes we need to oversee and protect our employees from abuse from other employees or maybe from customers, right? And other times we need to protect the business itself from harmless claims maybe made by employees. The bottom line is that the organization needs some form of immutable record, right? Some way to capture all the communications that are going on through email, through instant message, through Microsoft Teams, through social, and have that in a unified place so that they can properly investigate and remediate issues within the workplace. And on the legal side, the legal oversight side, it's similar. The issues are a little bit different. So, you know, for those of you who have or maybe are watching the, I don't know if it's a Netflix series. I'm watching Suits on Netflix again, but you're well aware on how widespread litigation is in corporate America, right? And that's not going away. That's only going to increase with technology evolution, with global crises, with social movements. You know, litigation and lawsuits they're not going away. And all of these litigation issues are really fall under something called FRCP, or the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. They prescribe how civil lawsuits are governed and how organizations must comply if, you know, a legal matter comes up, on how they preserve information, how they share information, you know, either with outside counsel or with third parties for inspection. This is known as something called e-discovery. So our last story is this smaller capital management firm in California. They had to deal with litigation and legal issues, and whenever they had to run e-discovery, it was a very painful process. They had to involve their IT department. They had to give them the instructions on go to pull, you know, these types of emails from the email repository. They had to manually create legal holds. They had to put the information on physical hard drives and ship them, you know, via FedEx or UPS. I didn't catch that detail, to outside parties, right? So it was very time consuming, very painful to do the e-discovery process. So they looked to Zix and AppRiver to really modernize their whole approach to e-discovery and archiving, so that they could easily collect, search, you know, build legal holds, and even share information with outside parties without having to rely on their IT department. This could all be done by business users, by the lawyers themselves, really streamlining their whole legal operations within the organization. So that kind of caps it up. Hopefully there's been a couple of insights. I think we can all agree in summary that, you know, compliance is complex, right? It's far-reaching, it's becoming very challenging. And I think historically we have viewed compliance, you know, as a cost of doing business, a necessary evil. But I think in today's climate, right, with competition and regulations and digital, right, if you take a different view and look at compliance as a competitive advantage, right, as something that if your organization is proactive and uses that strong compliance posture to then be bold with your digital innovation, you're going to be able to outpace your competitors. You're going to be able to delight customers and bring that confidence within the organization to your employees, paying off all kinds of dividends. So with that, we'll kind of wrap it up. Turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate all the insights. Hopefully for those on the call, today's webinar provided some information on how different financial institutions are solving their compliance challenges through Mike's success stories there. For those on the call from Georgia, we look forward to seeing you at the Georgia Bankers Association Compliance Conference in 2 weeks, where we'll be doing even a deeper dive into compliance challenges and learning a lot about what's happening here in the state. And finally, we definitely want to highlight, again, back to the partnership with Zix AppRiver. We're offering for those attendees on the webinar a free Microsoft 365 security audit report, which Mike described during one of his success stories. And certainly access to AppRiver's industry-leading products. The Zix AppRiver secure cloud platform is industry-leading in all aspects, and certainly supports, as Mike discussed, how customers in the financial industry are using those products to support their compliance challenges. If you're interested in learning more about some of the solutions that Mike described, or certainly these offers, you can reach out to us at securemycloud@ablesolutions.com, and we will get back with you. With that, Nicole, I'll turn it over to you to lead the Q&A.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Mike. So we did have a few questions come in during the presentation. So the first question looks to be related to the first trend that you were discussing on workplace transformation. There was a customer case study focused on improving communication with high net worth clients. So the question is, if the customer required email encryption for business to business communications as well, would the same setup work, or would a different solution be required?
Yeah, so a very good question. The quick answer is yes, you could definitely support many use cases. And typically what we see with our customers is they have a particular problem or use case that they're trying to solve. So for example, they're communicating with their customers, right? And they want to make sure that there's this simple, seamless experience. And so they'll implement the solution, but over time, right, because compliance is changing and business processes change, they then have these subsequent or ongoing use cases. And And that's the power of our encryption solution. And, you know, one of the advantages when you've been building a solution over many, many years, you layer on all these different capabilities and use cases. So in the example of business to business email encryption, typically the way that encryption happens is a little bit different. You know, we can automatically do the encryption at the edge of both networks, at the outgoing network and at the receiving network. And just to give you a little bit of light on that, we have a private encryption network. Unfortunately, I can't remember how many organizations are part of that. I think it's like many thousands of organizations. So, for example, many of the treasury departments and departments that fall under the FFIEC, they're all set up on our encryption network. So what that means is when a financial institution wants to start sending secure email to any part of that encryption network, it automatically gets encrypted without any configuration work, any work on the end user's part. And so whether you're communicating with customers or other businesses or state agencies, the same platform can be used. You just set up different policies for those different use cases once, kind of a set and forget thing, and the platform takes over. So a lot of flexibility, a lot of branding options to make sure that as I said, the user experience, because in a bank, right, you'll have different types of customers too. You might have your retail banking customers, your high net worth customers, your investment customers, loans. So the branding might even be different as you communicate email communications. All that can be handled on the same platform.
Excellent. Thank you. This next one, maybe Scott can take. This person was interested in the security audit tool that we discussed, and is that something that we as Able Solutions could help further understand or try? And I think we kind of covered that on this last slide here.
Yeah, but I'll just say a couple quick things. So certainly, or potentially, folks on the call are familiar with the Microsoft Secure Score, which Microsoft basically provides an overview of security risk as it relates to a customer's 365 tenant. The Microsoft security audit that we do in partnership with AppRiver is doing things beyond what Microsoft does. We are looking at very detailed transit rules and forwarding rules and password policies and things that go to a much deeper level, especially in the context of email. Because as Mike mentioned, email is frankly the biggest doorway into any organization as it relates to cyber threats. So this audit goes deep into the email side of the equation to see things that even regular IT processes and reports under an Exchange environment are not going to report. And the beautiful thing about this audit and report is now through the efforts of Zix AppRiver, it will be becoming a scheduled type reporting process. So it's not just taking a snapshot and you have to worry about it, what happens in 2 weeks or whatever. Zix AppRiver continues to make improvements to it that allow it to be scheduled, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely something that we can explore with folks if they're interested.
Great. Thank you. Let's see, here's another one. We have a broker-dealer operations deal and must comply with FINRA and SEC for records retention. Can you shed a bit more light on how you collect data from various channels, and are there tools to easily search or audit the archive when you have multiple data sources? I think that goes back to Mike.
Yep, thank you for the question. So yeah, it's I guess, you know, not being a technology expert, what we do is I'll think of a funnel, for example, so we have the ability to capture upwards of 50 different types of communication. So we mentioned email, Microsoft Teams, you know, Slack, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. We can collect a large number of different communication channels. And what we do is we capture that information. We then normalize it. We convert it into what's called a .eml format, and then all of those messages with all the data, you know, the dates, the time, senders, recipients, all the content, all of that gets brought into a unified archive. And so that makes it easy to have a single view of all your communications when you're doing discovery or doing, you know, searches or supervisory functions for FINRA. And of course, you're able to see, even though they're all normalized into that same format, you're still able to see what's a LinkedIn message or an email message or a Twitter message, so on and so forth. So that standard format makes it easy to search, to discover, and to share, right? I mentioned sharing is very important. If you need to share your supervisory activities with an auditor, you know, it's virtually a click of a button and the you know, coding or entry of an email address. And now that external auditor can easily look at the information that's placed into that particular legal hold. Thank you for the question.
Great, that's very cool. And then I think we've got time, maybe just one more. It looks to be related to the use case that you were talking about around corporate governance, where you mentioned a term, modern archiving. So what is different with that, and what's involved in moving from an existing archiving platform?
Yeah, so we collectively use a term called modern archiving to describe a few things. So what I call a legacy archive or traditional archive is typically an on-premise server. You know, archiving is not new, it's been around for a while, but it's been deployed and used in different ways. And it typically involves, you know, on-premise servers and on-premise software, and it is very heavyweight, so to speak, to manage. And so modern archives typically are all cloud-based, right? Using software as a service. Very easy to manage. There's no hardware on site. There's no software on site. And so that's, first of all, it's deployed in the cloud, very easy to manage. It has modern tools. So we already talked about being able to collect communication sources beyond email. But then you've got to think about the interface. I touched on this briefly, but you know, the people that you want using the archive and running searches and putting it to work to run the company better are business users, right? I'm not a technology person. I can use the business software that I'm given, but I'm not an IT guy, and neither are your lawyers or your HR representatives. And so you want a modern interface, right? A very modern web interface that's intuitive and easy to use, and then has those capabilities that I already mentioned, right? Easy to share information with outside parties. One of the biggest challenges, so there's a bit of a lag. A lot of applications are moving to the cloud, you know, like email and business applications. Archive has been slow, and one of the reasons is that the migration is not necessarily straightforward, right? It's like, oh, I've got this big amount of data that I want to migrate to a new archiving platform. And so part of our service, part of our solution, I guess, our modern archiving solution, is also about that migration, being able to import information into that environment. And you know, you always want to ask vendors about exporting capabilities, because unfortunately, many vendors, I don't know if it's the right expression, but they kind of hold you hostage, right? So you're using their archive and you're like, well, I think we're going to move on to another platform. Like, okay, no problem, but it's going to cost you X amount of dollars per gigabyte or terabyte to take your data away and out of the system. And that can be extremely, you know, a big cost impact. So you want to think about migration into a modern archive, and then make sure you have the flexibility, if you ever want to change, that you can export that data without being handcuffed by the vendor.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Mike. I think you shared so much great information and so much of your great experience with us today, and so I thank you. And thank you all so much for joining today. That brings us to the end of our session. Just one final reminder, just don't fall victim to data loss or breach. Engage with us to help your organization make the best use of the tools and features of Microsoft 365 to ensure that you're maximizing your cloud investment and you're minimizing your risks. So contact us today to get started, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you all.
Thanks all. Have a great day. Bye.